Hi everyone, I'm Kyana and welcome to Faking the Presses, a podcast where a journalism student from Toronto Metropolitan University talks to established journalists and experts about their work on fake news, disinformation, and online manipulation. On this episode of Faking the Presses, I had the pleasure of speaking with Jeff Kao. Jeff is a computational journalist for ProPublica and has actually worked with former guest Craig Silverman on a number of articles. We talked about his 2021 piece for ProPublica and the New York Times called How China Spreads Its Propaganda Version of Life for Uyghurs. Here's what Jeff had to say. So, hello, and thank you for joining me today.
Sure. Glad to be here.
And first, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience with fake news and disinformation?
Sure. Yeah. I'm a computational journalist at ProPublica, which means, investigations that are primarily data driven, often, fact gathering using, uh, uh, you know, computer systems. Sometimes it's one computer, sometimes, it's a lot of computers, in the cloud. And I collect data using them and analyze it to find facts in the world that go into news investigations. These skills have come in really handy in terms of investigating social media platforms, how disinformation travels over them, where it's originated, who does the origination, and things like that. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've been here for almost 5 years, and we've done a lot of different types of stories, relating to state-backed propaganda on social media platforms, relating to events like January 6th and platforms' failures to police content. Um, and yeah, feel very lucky to work at a place where someone with you know skills in one domain and more computer science and data analytics, I can team up with investigative reporter who is really good at asking questions and finding sources and learning secrets that are otherwise hard to get at, and it produces some pretty interesting results.
Right. And what kind of skills or even maybe a degree would someone need to be in your position?
Yeah, so a lot of people, I think, in the data journalism side, come to it, from a journalism background, and their undergrad was probably journalism degree or something similar, um, and another half of folks working in the fields have more of a technical background, so maybe computer science or statistics, and I would consider myself more of the latter, right? But I think if you're, I think it's very interdisciplinary, right? Even though um, you might be good at coding, right? You still have to understand sort of what you're doing it for, and understand, what the important journalistic questions are, right? In order to do your work well. And by the other token, if you're more of a traditional journalist, it's really much easier to work with someone who's more technical if you know sort of what's an easy problem to solve with computer systems and what's a difficult problem to solve. But I think, folks who get into data journalism usually come from one of those two backgrounds.
All right, thank you. So is actually I kind of don't know. Is this you sent a presentation to me about disinformation? Is this a news article as well, or is it just a presentation?
It's a presentation that I made at a few conferences, but it's about a story that I did. Sort of, it's an example of an investigation that originated with, fact gathering using computers, right? And sort of turned into a whole story that I think it was page in the New York Times. So it was like a pretty good result. And yeah, like, starting with sort of these little nuggets of information, you can sort of expand it into a whole, whole news story, investigative story.
So what is the disinformation of the piece in general?
Sure, yeah. So we had come across a bunch of videos on the internet, on different social media platforms, basically of Uyghurs, which are a Muslim minority in the Chinese province of Xinjiang, which is sort of like a northwest, pretty rural area of the country, where the Uyghur minority is actually the majority there, right? It's the predominant ethnicity there. And there's been a lot of accusations about essentially cultural genocide, right? People call it, or some people, have termed it actual genocide, where the government has, forced people to, marry people of other ethnicities, has sent people to what they call re-education camps, to try to sort of, reform them and change their culture, essentially. And also, other people have worked in what has been accused of, slave labor conditions. And so, there have been a lot of, academic studies and, investigative reporting about this part of the world. And they've accused, many governments have accused China of essentially cultural genocide or genocide proper. And so these videos where people of these ethnic minorities, Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang, they're taking these selfie videos, sort of like what you see, think of like now as a TikTok video. TikTok was not as popular a few years ago, but they would, they hold up their phone, they would look at the camera and they would say, "Hey, everyone's saying that there's genocide here. That's not the case. I'm doing well. My family is happy, and we live a happy life here." And so these videos started appearing in 2020, and our investigation essentially found that these are coordinated, essentially orchestrated, and pushed out over the internet by people in the Chinese government. Essentially, a case of a government propaganda campaign online.
Right. And were these people like influencers or just seemingly normal people?
They're seemingly normal people, and people from sort of all walks of life. And we collected these videos online, and it led to, it essentially enabled us to do sort of a parallel investigation, sort of using traditional means, right? So, we'd see people talking about their lives, and maybe it'd be like a small business, right? And then you'd see like a phone number in the background of one of the videos, and one of the reporters would call them up, and they said, "Oh yeah, this local official who is a propaganda official put me up to it. You should talk to him." He didn't think it was all that bad because I don't think the implications of doing these videos was all that clear to the people who were asked to do it, right? They just, I think you do what government officials tell you to. But yeah, so there are people, just regular people from all walks of life. In some cases, they seem like very like coerced. In some other cases, not. I think in total we collected like 3,000 plus unique videos of different people. And if you go to the story, we sort of point out why we thought, beyond calling up sources and hearing it from them, why we thought they were sort of part of the same campaign. The videos would have very similar scripts. They would say very similar things, use funny language remarkably consistently. In some of the videos, we even heard in the background, this guy would be sort of like saying the script, right? And then you would hear like the page turn when he flips when he flips the piece of paper that he was reading off of him. So yeah, but it was through sort of a combination of data analysis and reporting that we could sort of bring all these pieces of like why we thought this campaign was orchestrated together.
Do you know if these people were being paid or just told to do it?
No, they weren't. I highly doubt they were paid. I mean, another source of evidence we found was there were these local party committee meetings, and people would sort of submit what they wrote about the topic to these party committees. So, it didn't seem like a paid sort of like, product, right? It was sort of, you were told by a government official to do it. But we also saw that, there were propaganda workers. So these are people who were paid, not sort of like per video or to appear in a video, but they were, their job was a government worker, and what they did was also do these videos and produce these videos. So I guess in a sense they were paid, right? But not in the sense of paid per video or paid so that they were enticed enough to do the video. Yeah, they were just, employees whose job it was to make and disseminate these videos.
And so the point of, I guess, this campaign was to be like, no, there's no genocide here. But was there any other point?
Yeah, so it actually evolved over time, right? And so the time frame is actually quite interesting. So right at the beginning of 2020, that was right when the administrations in the US were changing hands, right? So, Trump had lost in the election. The last day of the prior administration is like sometime in January 20th or something like that. And then after that date, you know, everyone would like switch over and be the new administration, right? So on that day, on the last day of the Trump administration, Mike Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State at the time, right before he resigned, he actually put out a statement saying that there was genocide in Xinjiang, right? So that was sort of, an official government statement from the executive branch. And right after that, about 3 days later, we saw these videos appearing online, right? So that was fairly clearly in response to what Pompeo said. And in fact, in many of those scripts, people, it's kind of funny to think about, but like all these like people living in rural Xinjiang, like suddenly knew who the Secretary of State of the U.S., Mike Pompeo, was. And apparently like heard about what he had said on Fox News and started disagreeing with him. So that kind of to have so many people all of a sudden say that kind of it's kind of not that credible, right? But that went on for 3 or 4 months, and then the campaign actually shifted. During the middle of that year, I think it was about March or April, there were a number of Western clothing manufacturers, Nike and Adidas and H&M was like a really big one who started. You got to fact check me on the on the organization. I know H&M was one of them, but they started not to source cotton from Xinjiang because they said, there's credible evidence that the cotton was being collected using forced labor, right?
Hi, everyone. It's Editing Kyana. And according to a New York Times article from April 2021, the other Western clothing brands that got swept up in this cotton scandal are Adidas, Nike, Converse, and Burberry. And so I'm going to read an exact quote from them. Even before the ban, additional companies like Patagonia, PVH, Marks and Spencer, and The Gap had announced that they did not source material from Xinjiang and had officially taken a stance against human rights abuses, end quote. So those are some of the Western clothing brands and companies that were in this scandal. So just wanted to clear that up, and let's get back to the episode. Bye.
And so, in March and April, all of a sudden, as we were tracking these videos being put out on the internet, all these videos came out saying, hey, I'm a happy Xinjiang cotton farmer, and all our cotton picking is automated, and there isn't any slave labor here. And I'm really mad at H&M, and we should boycott H&M, which was quite interesting. And again, very similar case, right? Like maybe a little bit more credible that, farmers in the middle of rural Xinjiang would all of a sudden, you know, care about H&M. But that was definitely a campaign that we had tracked sort of appearing at the same time, the sort of second topic of these accounts.
Yeah, I didn't realize the H&M and clothing brands would play into it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it actually ended up being a very successful campaign within China. There's a lot of backlash against Western companies, and there's actually a lot of instances where, and these are actually like often opinions that are popularly held in China, right? Of like, oh, we're not going to shop at H&M anymore, but often these opinions are sort of a mix of like organic and also, the government sort of fanning the flames of public anger in a certain direction. And so there have been a lot of Western companies, organizations that have been pressured in various ways because, obviously the Chinese consumer market is very large and, they have very strong opinions about certain things. So Yeah, so this is not definitely not the first case.
And you mentioned how, I guess, the government would fan the flames of these opinions. How would they do that? Would they spread fake news or just kind of amplify these opinions?
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, speaking for the cases that we saw, as part of that particular story, it started off on sort of domestic platforms, right? And these videos would get reproduced on, Twitter, on YouTube, and disseminated. That was one route, right? And then there was also domestic social media like Douyin, which is the Chinese version TikTok, the original version, right? And also through public officials. So, like, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they started sort of repeating the same information as well. And so you could see it was sort of like a, if not coordinated, at least simultaneous and correlated campaign where this all came out at once. I think there have been academic studies too of sort of like, much more from like a political science perspective of like what are the organizations that sort of have these roles, in Chinese society. But yeah, I'm not as read up on that, especially at this point. It's been a little while since we did that story, so. But yeah, there's like it's like a mix of genuine and people just encouraging people to feel a certain way.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm going to cut my conversation with Jeff short because I split our interview into two parts. Thank you to Jeff for speaking with me in such depth, and you can find the article we discussed linked below. Thank you for listening to this episode of Faking the Presses, and stay tuned for more episodes. Once again, I'm Kyana, and watch out for fake news.